Alright, how's it going, guys? So I want to cover a topic today that I find kind of a lot of newer players kind of struggle with, or they don't understand the significance of it. And that topic is animal control. Now, this isn't really an original idea. Obviously, lots of people have in the past made similar guides, whether it's text-based guides or video guides. But I feel like this is such an important concept, and there's really kind of a lot of information all over the place. So I thought there wouldn't really be anything wrong with me making my own interpretation of this information. Um, a lot of newer players I find kind of look at animals in kind of the complete opposite way that they actually should. So a lot of newer players feel that running into animals is kind of an RNG element, and they look at it more so as like not very important, with maybe like Wickly being an exception for them. So I really want to make this video not just to kind of go over the information that we have, but to try to clear the air, clear things up, and put emphasis on kind of the importance of this. So I would say kind of that at Wolf rank, players typically have a grasp on recipes, item locations, item routes, things along the lines of that. But I think the things that separates Wolf players from Lion, or even to a certain extent Lion players from Bears, in my opinion, is a good grasp on good animal control. There's obviously several more elements as well. It's not just that. There's flexibility. There's how effectively you can play on the offensive spectrum. How quickly you can react and adapt to the situation. Those are all very important things as well that kind of separate the tiers as well. But I would say animal control definitely plays a large role in having success. I find the reason animal control is so important is Black Survival is a very luck-based and it's a very unpredictable game. You can't always control who and when you run into enemy players. You can't control what and when you find certain items. You could find what you're looking for in the first search, or you could find it on the 12th search, which, in my opinion, is why backup weapon paths are so important. I talk about this all the time with Lance of Poseidon, how Parallel Sword is such a good backup for if you aren't finding the right items. But what I'm trying to stress here is that there's very little that is constant between every game. However, there is one thing that is always constant and always predictable, and these are animal spawns. So animals they're guaranteed mastery, they're guaranteed items, and it's something that is consistent between each game. And controlling animals is important not just for the benefits you get from hunting these animals, but also for the advantage that you can deny your opponents by kind of stealing that spawn. And one more thing I want to emphasize before I get into the specifics, that animal control is not just a one-time thing. The respawn timers are almost as important as the initial spawn timer. And being the person to kill an animal gives you vital information because you're now the only person in the game who knows down to the second when that animal will respawn. So the first animals to kind of talk about here are the small game, those being the crow and the bat. And the nice thing about these animals is they become very accessible very early in the game, and their respawn times are very short, really. They become available 2 minutes into the game, and they will continue to respawn every 2 minutes. The thing with these animals, though, is often the payout they offer isn't worth the time and the stamina it takes to kind of purposely go after them. So they're useful in certain situations. One of the main benefits they offer is kind of the recovery, kind of a small buffer of oftentimes untapped and uncontested mastery, basically every 2 minutes. Emphasis obviously on the small buffer. Um, if you think of it, if you're killing every single small game monster every time they spawn, you're looking at kind of a net gain of 6 mastery with bread drops as well every 2 minutes. And while that really isn't anything to write home about, when you start falling behind, you need some form of kind of supplementary support, or else you're going to just keep falling further and further behind. So starting with the bat will spawn at the temple, the chapel, and the tunnel, which are easy enough, I guess, to remember, as kind of like holy grounds is talked about in vampire lore, which can kind of explain the temple and the chapel. And then the tunnel is just kind of a dark area where you would find bats resting during the day. The bat doesn't really offer very much, and it's almost I was just going to die to a single hit, which is basically I was just going to get you 2 mastery. There isn't really very much to say about the bat, but it exists, and if you find it, it's free bread or something, right? So that's kind of nice. Next is the crow, and there are 2 types of crows. They both have feathers, but the crow with bread will be spawning at the dock, the beach, or the lighthouse, while the crow with water will spawn at the forest, the trail, or the pond. You can remember these spawns by kind of remembering that the bread bird spawns in all water areas that touch the outer edges of the map, and the water bird spawns in all kind of outside areas that have trees. So like if you look at the map, you can kind of see like a little bit of a green diagonal area arrow of tree areas, and it kind of passes through the research center. Now the nice thing about controlling crows is it's probably like the easiest monster to kind of effectively maintain respawns on. Kind of due to the fact that the bread crow spawns in some pretty low traffic areas as you go into the mid game, since places like the beach and the dock become much less traveled by people after like gun users have finished their kind of initial raid on those locations. But the point I'm driving at here is kind of how easy the crow is to kind of maintain when you if you appreciate the feathers into your build. So on past like wing knuckle, or even just to finish something off like feather boots or angel wing, because really trying to find feathers on the ground is often annoying due to kind of how scarce they are as a generality. Crows, very much like the bat, aren't really an amazing resource to kind of get, but it's something we have to talk about because we're talking about all monster spawns. Next type of monster to talk about is the medium game, I guess you could say. The only animals in this category are the dogs, but two of them spawn. So the dogs spawn initially at 2 minutes and 45 seconds, or basically in the last 15 seconds of the first round, and their respawn timer is 2.5 minutes. Now, while the crow and the bat really aren't that important, as I mentioned, the dog is pretty critical in many builds, particularly in the early game. So to begin with, it really gets the ball rolling with mastery. It really does. But dogs also drop some very high priority items that are very useful, pretty much at all points of the game. So leather and pens are useful on many builds in the early game, and they're always better to get these items off of a dog than to try to spend time looking for them on the ground. Like pens are annoying to try to find on the ground. Leather, outside, with the exception of like the forest, which has a lot of contention early game, leather is annoying to find as well. Even at the temple, it's annoying to find at the temple, but getting these off of a dog is very easy, very quick, and very efficient. And of course, lighters are always useful. For getting things going for food recipes. You can go them into boiling water. You can get them going into whetstones as well. So they're always nice to get that going as well. Especially because you can generally use boiling water in the areas that you find the lighter dog in the first place. I mentioned it's not that often that you really want to go out of your way to commit to kind of small game monsters, but I did kind of say this at the very beginning here, that dogs are very much worth going after, especially like I said, for weapon paths like stab or blade that really appreciate the leather drops. And all dogs drop leather, so yeah. The pen drop dog, it's going to be spawning in the alley, the slum, and the school. This can kind of be abbreviated into ASS, so the ass dog. You can also kind of remember these as the areas that a student would go to, so kind of the school being obvious, and then slums, kind of back alleys, because like students are poor as shit. So those are two kind of ways that you can kind of remember it. And like I mentioned, the dogs I find are very important to a lot of builds. The lighter drop dog is going to be spawning in the uptown, the town hall, and the hotel, which can as well be abbreviated into UHH. So you can also kind of remember this as kind of this is a place where kind of like regular people just go. So like uptown, town hall, hotel. These are just kind of residential areas that a regular person would kind of visit. Now, dogs are very important not only because of the item drops, which I mentioned, but because they also let you kind of consistently build mastery. And as I mentioned this before, your first 2 to 3 dog spawns, excuse me, really get the ball rolling. You won't always run into people. You won't always hear people make noises. However, the dogs will always spawn in 2 out of 6 areas. So this is consistency, and in a game where each match is very different from the last, in a game where RNG is as big of an element as it is, you have to take consistency where you can get it. It's a little bit awkward to maintain these respawns because it isn't like a neat time number that it's going to be respawning. The best way I guess I could explain it is it's going to be exactly 30 seconds less than 1 full round from the moment you kill it, if that makes any sense. So just like add 30 seconds to the current timer you're looking at, and the dog will respawn at that time next round. Now, if you can't hit every dog respawn, it's not really a major problem. Honestly, the only animals that you've got to be trying to hit each and every respawn, if you can, is like the bear and maybe the gorilla. But like I mentioned before, the dog is really nice into kind of trying to catch up when you start falling behind. Because obviously, if you're falling behind, you won't be able to actually contest the bear because the person who is ahead of you will most likely be maintaining that respawn. So you need to start killing the gorilla, start killing the dog multiple times, and that's really going to be kind of your safest way of trying to catch up, to try to make up the difference in mastery between you and your opponent. So now we're starting to get in kind of the real meat of the episode here, into the big game monsters, being the bear and the gorilla. So these monsters spawn after 6 minutes or at the end of the second round, and their respawn timer is basically the easiest respawn timer to keep track of, so it's exactly 3 minutes. So which is that's the exact time of a single round. So when you kill one of these monsters, look up at the time, make a mental note at what time it is when you killed it, and then you'll know that when you hit that time in the next round, that monster is going to be respawned, and you can go after it again. And honestly, as I mentioned before, this is why killing the bear or the gorilla for the first time is so powerful. Not only do you get all the regular benefits of these monsters, not only do you deny these benefits from your opponent, obviously being the mastery and the item drops, but you also are the only person in the entire match who knows the exact time, down to the second, when that animal will respawn. And if you can effectively use this information, you will be giving yourself an enormous advantage that other players obviously won't have. So let's talk about the bear first. The bear will spawn at the well, the hospital, or the cemetery. And I said this, I believe, in a few of my streams, but I'm going to kind of go over it again, how I've always remembered where the bear spawns. So Winnie the Pooh Bear is going around. He goes to the well, and he actually falls down the well, and he breaks his back. So they rush Winnie the Pooh to the hospital. But he actually dies in surgery, and they end up burying him in the cemetery. So those are the little story that I use to kind of memorize the 3 locations. The bear is going to be dropping garlic and a flower, and obviously some random items. But the main we're talking consistency here, so we want to kind of talk about the garlic and the flower. So the bear is I say this all the time, and it's one of the most important animals to hunt. Actually, to be a little bit more accurate, it's one of the most important variables in the game that you have the potential to actually control. So, garlic, talking about the drops here for a second, garlic offers some of the most effective and most consistent kind of late game healing, both being an upgrade to ramen and upgrade to soy sauce, both of which are some of the most kind of like standard late game heals that aren't RNG dependent like Petal do. The bear in the late game also provides kind of the most consistent way of getting a flower without wasting a lot of time looking for it on the ground. And this sounds weird to talk about, like, because it's just like the flower. You find this everywhere. You find this in the forest. You find this in the pond. But when you think of it, people pick up flowers and wear them as accessories in the early game, like all the time. Just if you start if you're passing through the forest or the pond, you're just going to pick up a flower. If you don't have another accessory, right? And you wear them accessories in the early game until they basically end up dropping them to switch for an actual accessory, or they craft it into recovery. So in the late game, flowers for Petal do, like if you want to finish upgrading like Petal do, flowers can be a little bit of a bitch to find if people have kind of like moved flowers around to kind of this extent. Like obviously they're not going to have used every flower, but like once you drop like a certain area down to like 1 or 2 flowers, then it becomes kind of annoying to find. And if you're just looking for just a flower in a single area, that becomes in itself pretty annoying. So, like I said, it's consistency, and consistency is just kind of a nice thing to have. Now, as a rule of thumb, what I like to say is kind of focus on your build for the first round and a half. Once you reach the point where there's half a round left to the second round, I always say you should basically drop what you're doing and make sure you've made enough food to contest the first bear spawn. Without food, you're going to lose to the first bear respawn. Not only just because of other players you'll lose to them 1v1, but you'll lose to like the bear 1v1. You'll end up finishing fighting the bear on like 40 health or something like that. And you can end up putting yourself in the backseat very early off in the game. So that's kind of why I say try to drop everything for the last half of a round to kind of set yourself up to actually take on the bear. And obviously then at the end of the second round, you'd be dropping everything and going to contest the bear. So typically the best way to use the bear drops is to kind of take the garlic and build it into garlic ramen. But pickled garlic is acceptable as well if you have the soy sauce. It's basically kind of whatever is more convenient for you. Garlic ramen is obviously really, really nice to have because if you get the ramen, then you kill the bear several times, and that's going to give you several garlic upgrades, and they all stack obviously on the same thing, whereas soy sauce would be a little bit more limited, but that is also kind of relying on you having the ramen. So like, if you have the soy sauce, there's nothing wrong with using the soy sauce for that. But like I said, you kind of want to, in an ideal world, you'll have found ramen, just have found it, and you'll have boiling water just anyway, and you can make it into that. Now, the gorilla is kind of an interesting case. It's kind of like a poor man's bear, if that makes any sense. So the gorilla is found at the archery range, the factory, and the fire station. And I don't have an interesting way to remember that. Um, I don't. So if you can think of your own way, let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll put a little annotation on saying something about it. But anyways, um, there's two scenarios where I would kind of recommend going after the gorilla. So the first scenario is kind of being outpaced by somebody, or just in general you're struggling to maintain control over the bear. And this is kind of a situation where I talked about earlier in the dog section. And in a situation where you're contesting the bear is just kind of a losing battle, then you would obviously have to go after the gorilla instead, because you have to be hunting one of the two. And in this case, as I kind of mentioned earlier, hunting the gorilla isn't going to be just enough. So you'll have to either hunt the dog or some small game as well, but you'll need to find some way to kind of catch up with your opponent, and the gorilla is kind of the stepping stone to start catching up to them. The other scenario is if you've already hunted the bear for this round and you're not behind in recovery items, you're not behind in armor, you're not behind in weapons. In this scenario, taking down the gorilla is for sure encouraged. Just you may as well go after it. While the bear offers more versatile health options, the gorilla gives you access to kind of stamina items, which is something that can't really be overlooked. Burdock and braised Burdock into braised burdock or burdock tea is very powerful. And really, this is kind of another scenario, actually, now that I think about it, that you kind of might want to hunt the gorilla, is when, like, you're in need of stamina items, and you have boiling water on your person, which, like, boiling water is not an uncommon item to have on your person. So, next is Wickling. Wickling randomly spawns after 9 minutes, or at the end of round 3, or at the beginning of night 1. All three of those things are the exact same thing, so whatever helps you remember it better. Generally, kind of seeing the scenery change from night to day is a good enough way to trigger the memory that Wicklings can be active. But in general, you can kind of remember that at the end of every round, there's going to be some monsters that you might want to pursue. So obviously, at the end of round 1, there's going to be the dogs. End of round 2, there's going to be the bear and the gorilla. End of round 3 is a Wickling. So Wickling spawns in a random area and moves every 3 minutes for their health. She drops Holy Blood and Arcane Stone, both of which are very powerful. A lot of people kind of, like I said, you prepare for the bear by building food items. A lot of people like to prepare for Wickling. Obviously, everyone, you need to prepare food for Wickling, but at this point in the game, you should have food anyways. A lot of people prepare food for Wickling, but they like to prepare feather boots for Wickling as well, which is a very nice thing. So if you're not going to be building into a nanorized arms weapon, which is typically if you're lacking a little bit on armor. So if you're lacking a little bit on armor, you would go into the feather boots to build into Boots of Hermes, and then you can use Holy Blood into a Holy Blood weapon. So that's, like I said, like if you're a little bit behind on the armor, if you don't have if you don't have good leg armor, you can just make feather boots with the assumption that you're going to be going into contesting the Wickling. And other than that, Holy Blood weapons are really good. Red Muffler is probably one of like the best blunt weapons that you can have. Red Muffler is fantastic. I've always been a huge fan of Spear of Longinus and Daneslav. Throw characters often like to build chakrams in preparation for the Holy Blood, kind of with the assumption that they're going to be going after that, so that's always nice as well. But the main, I feel like the best thing to get off Wickling is nanorized arms. So if you have the inventory to support that, which is going to be, if you're making nanorized arms, it's essentially you're essentially going to need to give up 4 inventory slots, unless you want to just take Arcane Stone and then go make the Arcane Motor and then come back for Holy Blood, which is putting yourself in a situation where you might not get the Holy Blood. Someone else might be able to find that off the body. But in a situation like that, I guess you could just make Automail if you can't re-get the Holy Blood. But essentially, like I said, if you have 4 inventory slots and you're willing to give up to start crafting this item, the nanorized arms weapons are really, really good. As a stab character, I love the opportunity to make Phase Saber. That's such a great weapon. But the point I want to kind of talk about here is that Wickling is always going to give you something that you can use. Like, you can always use Arcane Stone for, like, even if you don't want to make a nanorized arms weapon, Arcane Stone is always going to give you something nice. You can make Auto Mail, you can make Boots of Hermes. Even in some situations, you can make like Queen of Hearts. Holy Blood is always going to give you, if you don't need the extra armor, you probably can appreciate the weapon that you can make with Holy Blood. And like I said, if you have the inventories to support it, nanorized arms weapons are fantastic. The last monster to talk about is not really something to talk about with the respawns. It's just Dr. Meiji. He is in the research center, and yeah, that's like there's really not very much to talk about with him. You know what drops he's going to give you. The important thing to talk about for, like I said, in terms of preparation for monsters, for creatures, monsters, like I said, I talked about preparation for the large game animals. I talked about preparation for Wicklean. The preparation you're going to want to have for Dr. Meiji is you're going to want to be bringing in the pen so that you can finish off the radar. I think that's very important. Being able to just bring a pen into the research center and finish off the radar. I think it's important for hunting down JP, who's in a pretty bad spot right now anyways, so it's not as if like that's a huge thing to talk about, but it's a thing we are going to talk about. So yeah, that's basically everything I have to say. Everything I really have to say about Meiji. Meiji also gives you he gives you some stupid good stuff. He gives you bull intestines, which are fantastic, and he gives you the radar, and that's all you can ask for. That's so nice to have. But that's basically all the monsters and their respawns. Hopefully this was able to help, and if you did enjoy this, feel free to leave a like to let me know. If you have any questions or you feel like I missed something in this video, please let me know in the comments. And yeah, I guess I'll see you guys next time.